Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Carol Barrios and her family moved to the U.S. from Honduras in the late 90s. Carol is a U.S. citizen. Her dad has a green card. 7 years ago, Carol's parents divorced, and her dad went back to Honduras. But this winter, he decided to return to the States to be closer to his grandkids.
That was his trigger for him to want to come back, to say, okay, you know what, he has been missing on.
When Carol's dad landed in Miami in February, he was detained by immigration authorities. His green card wasn't set to expire until 2028, but the agent said he hadn't filed the proper paperwork to re-enter the country after those 7 years abroad. The next few weeks were a blur. Carol desperately tried to track her dad's movements as he was transferred from one facility to another. And then, Carol got a phone call. It was her dad. He didn't know where he was.
He asked me if I knew where the call was coming from. And then I told him Albuquerque, New Mexico.
He had been flown to Albuquerque and then bused about an hour to the small town of Estancia, New Mexico. And he was being held in the Torrance County Detention Facility, a private detention facility that's holding people in ICE custody from all over the country.
Under prior administrations, this is also how things worked, right? What's different this time is that there are so many arrests, and the Trump administration is detaining so many people that it's using, in some cases, more beds than it even has.
ICE is finding those extra beds in private detention facilities like the one in Torrance County, and it's contracting with local governments to get access to them. Bloomberg reporters Fola Akinnibi and Rachel Adams-Heard have been reporting on this facility in rural New Mexico and on its relationship with ICE ever since Trump took office. Because as the administration seeks to carry out mass deportations, these kinds of private detention contracts are becoming more central to its immigration agenda.
For ICE to be able to quickly execute this type of detention strategy, it really is dependent on these agreements with counties.
And that means convincing more towns like Estansia that ICE can be their lifeblood. This is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. I'm Sarah Holder. Today on the show, inside a town that runs on ICE. How private detention facilities across America are becoming key to the federal government's immigration crackdown, and the financial incentives making it harder for small communities to quit them. Estancia, New Mexico is a town of about 1,300 residents. 100 years ago, it was a lively agricultural hub.
The railroad went straight through the town, so you had people and commerce stopping through. This, in turn, brought a lot of business to the area.
Back in the 80s when I graduated, there was a movie theater, a vehicle dealership, 3 or 4 bars.
That's the town's mayor, Nathan Dial. When Rachel and Fola visited in March, he gave them a tour.
The footprint of Estancia is basically 1 mile by 1 mile.
You don't really have to drive far in Estancia. There's a bunch of churches, a lot of abandoned storefronts, a lot of abandoned shops.
Estancia today is not the agricultural or commercial hub it once was. In the 1930s, droughts decimated crops and sent property values plummeting. And then, a few decades later, Interstate 40 was built.
And so all of the commerce that had kind of gone through the town because of the railroad, it's now going just north of town along I-40. And this is kind of what Nathan Dial likes to equate to the Pixar movie Cars.
That's not a cartoon, it's a documentary.
In Cars, Radiator Springs, the town, it's on the historic Route 66. Interstate 40 is built, and all of a sudden the town just kind of falls into disrepair. And it's, of course, saved when Lightning McQueen moves his racing headquarters there. For Estansia, their revitalization came through Corrections Corporation of America, now CoreCivic.
CoreCivic is the company that runs the Torrance County Detention Facility. It provided the Lightning McQueen boost Estancia was looking for, as the war on drugs and the expansion of pretrial detention sent incarceration rates up.
That's all really good for CoreCivic's main business. But then kind of during the Obama era, when we have sentencing reform, those numbers start to drop.
By 2017, the number of people CoreCivic was holding on behalf of the federal government had dropped so sharply that the company decided to close the facility down. But then, just 2 years later, in 2019, ICE swooped in. They wanted to use some of the beds in the New Mexico facility to detain immigrants. So ICE inked a deal, not with CoreCivic, but with Torrance County itself.
So essentially, for Torrance County, they're party to what's called an intergovernmental service agreement. It says that ICE or the U.S. Marshals will pay the county as like an administrator of this deal, and they'll be able to use the beds in the facility. And so they pay like a per person per day rate.
ICE started paying Torrance County about $2 million a month to use around 700 beds in the facility. And CoreCivic was back in business in Estancia. Now, under President Trump's second term, ICE is sending people it arrests hundreds of miles away to this facility. Because as ICE pursues the administration's mass deportation agenda, the agency has widened its enforcement priorities, targeting people with green cards, people who've lived in the U.S. for years, people like Carol Barrios' dad. And while past administrations have used discretion to release people ahead of their immigration hearings, Trump's policy has been to detain them. ICE now needs a lot more detention space, so the federal government is finding new counties to sign the same types of agreements as the one in Torrance County.
It's happening all over the country. There are like well over 100 of these agreements. This is how ICE gets bed space. There are not very many ICE-owned facilities. And so this is how they are able to quickly get and fill beds.
And the numbers are only growing. Since Trump retook office in January, the federal government has arranged new agreements with about 30 U.S. counties to use their jails to detain immigrants. And ICE wants to spend up to $45 billion more on these detention contracts. For ICE, the arrangement in Torrance County makes its job easier. CoreCivic handles staffing. And working directly with county governments helps ICE move faster. The agency doesn't have to enter a competitive bidding process to decide who gets the contract or do all the paperwork that comes with that process.
The county government is sort of smoothing this process for both the federal government and for the private prison company.
The county has a reason to sign these detention deals, too.
They pay taxes, they provide jobs. In some of these deals, there's an administrative fee that they pay the county as well. And in the case of Torrance County, they also get beds for their local detainees. And they say that without this, they would have to take people to Santa Fe, which is like an hour and a half or 2 hours away. It's a long drive.
ICE is now paying Torrance County $2.3 million a month to use 505 beds. And CoreCivic gets paid more if the agency uses more than that. The facility employs about 100 people countywide.
My sisters worked out there. My sons worked out there. My daughters worked out there. My nephews have worked out there.
That's the mayor of Estancia again.
And I will admit, me, Nathan Dial, I fought them having a private prison. Because of all the things the government should be running, it should be prisons. That's my personal opinion. But as mayor, I understand it's the lifeblood of the town.
He views it as a financial necessity for the town and its residents. And we looked at the town's tax revenue, and it does make up a significant portion of what's called the gross receipts tax, which is kind of like New Mexico's version of a sales tax almost.
When Rachel and Fola were in Estancia, they drove up to the facility to see it from the outside.
CoreCivic, Torrance County Detention Facility.
The fence is probably like 15 feet?
Yeah.
The facility isn't sort of within that small mile by mile city limit. Instead, it's off a side road, and then you just see this huge complex that's surrounded by razor wire and huge fences, and there's nothing else really around it.
And inside the facility, I want to make sure we talk about the conditions inside. What are emblematic stories you heard from people being detained there?
Some common complaints I've heard are that it's kept excessively cold, that the food is undercooked, sometimes inedible, that there isn't enough of it at times, pretty constant complaints about understaffing, that there aren't enough people working at the detention facility. And this is something that federal inspectors have found several times in the past as well.
In March of 2022, the Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security urged all people in ICE custody to be removed from the facility due to critical staffing shortages. CoreCivic disputed the inspector's findings, and ICE largely sided with CoreCivic.
So it's an interesting situation where you do have these federal inspections and audits that have pinpointed issues, but there really hasn't been punishment. The punishment that was recommended did not actually end up happening.
ICE didn't evacuate the facility, but later that year, it did agree to a series of other recommendations from the Inspector General. CoreCivic says it's, quote, committed to providing safe, humane, and appropriate care for the people in its facilities. It says all detainees have access to healthcare services and disputes allegations of staffing shortages. It also pointed to recent audits by the ICE Office of Detention Oversight, which gave the Torrance County Detention Facility good ratings in the 2024 fiscal year and superior ratings in the 2025 fiscal year.
I'd just quickly add that the Trump administration has recently significantly rolled back some of these oversight functions. In March, the administration eliminated the two bodies that are responsible for doing some of the site visits and inspections of these facilities.
The conditions at the detention facility have also gotten the attention of local advocates. New Mexico is a blue state, and its role in advancing deportation policy makes many residents uncomfortable. So some are now pushing the county to envision an economic future beyond immigration detention and end its contract with ICE. Every few months, the Torrance County commissioners have to vote on whether to extend the agreement. The last vote happened in March.
Are y'all here for the county commission meeting?
Yeah.
Fola and Rachel were in the room.
Being at the meeting, we saw more than a dozen people read testimony from inside the facility, folks talking about the conditions, talking about their feelings of hopelessness.
They have treated me like a prisoner, not like a migrant.
The lack of food, the lack of communication with ICE officials, the lack of communication about their cases.
I had second and third degree burns for which there was no adequate medical care here. Though I had to wait 3.5 hours, almost 4 hours, for an ambulance to arrive so they could take me outside.
You all are in the extraordinary position where you have the opportunity to intervene in the system of harm. I urge you all to vote against the extension of the contract with ICE. Thank you.
After the break, Torrance County's leaders vote on its contract with ICE, and we meet one of the county commissioners who's weighing in on the facility's fate. Linda Jaramillo is the newest member of the Torrance County Commission. She's a Republican, the only woman and the only Spanish speaker on the commission. Back in March at the county commission meeting, she was preparing to cast her vote on whether to extend the county's contract with ICE through October.
Request approval of a modification to the intergovernmental agreement between Torrance County and the United States Department of Immigration and Customs.
She, before her vote, took some time to say, like, look, I hear you guys.
So I've been listening to these accounts of mistreatment at the prison.
She said, I need to go see this myself. Like, I'm not sure if this is true or if this is actually what's happening.
And is it okay if I visit the prison?
So she visited and then she voted?
No, she did not visit. She said she would like to visit, but in the meantime, she'll vote yes.
So I'm going to vote for this today. I'm not going to do it. But I'd like to have more interaction with these detainees.
And so she voted for the extension, and so it passed 3-0 unanimously.
Rachel and Fola spoke to Jaramillo at her house after the vote. They wanted to know how she came to her decision.
We were sitting on the porch with her. It was a breezy day. You can kind of hear the wind chimes.
Was the decision on the ICE contract hard today?
Yes, but I know we had to vote on it. I don't want anybody to be treated cruelly, and I don't even know if that's true or not.
Do you think that the detainees that you've heard from are making it up?
No, I don't think they're making it up, but I just can't imagine that anybody would be treating somebody like that. I'm not saying they're liars or anything, but I know the people that work there. I mean, what happens from...
In the time since her vote, Jaramillo told Rachel she did visit the facility, to see things for herself.
This wasn't a surprise visit. They had a couple days heads up, and the warden was with her during the tour. She said that in general, things look clean. She said the detainees complained about food, and one person said that he had a headache that he needed treatment for. But in general, she felt like things were run efficiently.
In a few months, Harmo will have the chance to vote on the contract extension again. I
asked her if she was thinking any differently about the October vote, and she said, I'm very torn. I'm really, really torn. So I think we'll see what she decides the next time she'll have the opportunity to vote on this. Even if she votes no, they would need another commissioner to vote no for the contract between the county and ICE to be terminated.
That's never happened before. Every time they vote, the county chooses to maintain its relationship with ICE.
There is this financial dependence on CoreCivic right now and on the ICE contract by extension.
Research shows that prison construction can actually impede economic growth in rural areas. One study from 2010, looking at the economic impact of prison economies over a nearly 30-year period, found that these facilities can divert resources away from other community services, making these areas less attractive for other economic development. But Rachel says it's hard for communities like Estansia to imagine untethering their economies from incarceration once they're hooked.
Most of the people we spoke with seemed to accept that this was just the way it was going to be. There are a lot of local communities all across the country that do have a tremendous amount of power when it comes to how immigrants in ICE custody are treated, where they are taken. And I think that role is vastly overlooked in this debate.
We asked, administrations change and policies change, and there could be a scenario where a new administration or even this administration decides that they don't need this facility. And if it closes, do you have a plan for what's next? And I don't think at any point we got a serious answer. I don't think it was something that folks had considered there.
For people like Carol Barrios' father, the latest ICE contract extension means a continuation of the status quo. And advocates and people inside the detention facility say conditions there deteriorated a few weeks ago when water supply issues reportedly left toilets overflowing and feces on the ground and led to limits on people's access to drinking water.
People in detention were told that they were limited to 2 water bottles a day at times, and we heard that people were going days without showers.
In emails, CoreCivic said there were no sewage or plumbing issues at the facility, and that water pressure fluctuations had caused some toilets to overflow in, quote, a few rare occasions. They also said showers were placed on a schedule, but were still available to everyone. After Fola and Rachel published their story, an ICE spokeswoman added in a statement that the agency acknowledges the concerns raised about the facility and remains, quote, committed to addressing them in a timely and transparent manner. Carol's been emailing ICE and CoreCivic to raise the alarm about conditions in the facility. She even flew to New Mexico to visit her father. He told her the facility smells awful and that he'd gone days without showering. And now they're hundreds of miles apart again, anxiously awaiting his next court date.
This is an example of who is being targeted and how widespread and how sort of blanket the administration's efforts to detain and deport people are.
It's a tremendous amount of money that's changing hands through these local governments to private prison companies a lot of time. And there's a lot less scrutiny of it because of the way that these contracts are done.
This is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. I'm Sarah Holder. To see photographs from on the ground in Estansia and view maps showing how many people ICE is now sending to New Mexico, read the full story on Bloomberg.com or at the link in our show notes. This episode was produced by Julia Press and David Fox. It was edited by Aaron Edwards and Flynn McRoberts. Additional reporting by Polly Mossens. Special thanks to Kayla Shea. The episode was fact-checked by Rachel Lewis-Kriski and mixed and sound designed by Alex Sugiura. Our senior producer is Naomi Shavin. Our senior editor is Elizabeth Ponso. Our deputy executive producer is Julia Weaver. Our executive producer is Nicole Beamsterboer. Sage Bauman is Bloomberg's head of podcasts. If you like this episode, make sure to subscribe and review The Big Take wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps people find the show. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.